It's Wednesday, November 5th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. So it was billed as a budget that must be generational in its ambition and serves to shape our economy and our nation's future, so said Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne about yesterday's federal budget. Today on the show, we're going to look under the hood and see what it means for you. All right, let me see. The budget projects a deficit of $78 billion for 2025-26, forecast to drop to $65 billion. Next fiscal gradually will fall to $57 billion. Lots of spending promises in the budget, right? Like I said there in the introduction, it was promised to be generational, promising a new era of leadership, a new economic foundation. 406 pages. I don't know if you're counting. I wasn't. I just read that on CBC News. We're going to get into a budget discussion here today. Maybe even a little bit on Eurovision. We'll see. So joining me now, we've got MUN Business Prof. Tom Cooper, AnnMarie Boudreau, CEO of the Board of Trade, MUN Business Professor MUN Business Professor Tom Cooper, there we go. Lynn Gambin, the economist, and Scott Matthews, MUN Political Science Professor. See what happened? I wrote everyone else, and then I changed your order for me reading it, and I didn't take the title. A generational style of investment. First take on the budget. Who wants to go first? The business prof, not the economist, the business prof.
When we look at generational budgets, and for me, I would see this as a generational budget because of its investment in infrastructure and the importance of infrastructure, and moreover with the geopolitical, and Scott and Lynn and Ann can probably point on this as well, but what's going on in the United States and the pivoting over into Europe and to other markets, as well as we have crumbling infrastructure here in Canada, and it's something that we've needed to invest for a long time. I like the idea of this not being a credit card budget, but being a mortgage budget, where we're investing in the long term and we're investing in the infrastructure for the country. At the same time, though, Adam, the number of cuts to the civil service scares me because the economic impact of a lot of those, especially well-paid specialist civil servants, not only here in Newfoundland and Labrador, but across the country, they play a pivotal importance in guiding and regulating and really fostering communities. And so that's one of the negatives that I would say. So,
yeah, it's a drop in about 40,000 positions in the coming years, right? The budget projects that we'll have 330,000 employees in 2028-29, down from the 368,000 counted last year. Right? That's a lot of, like you said, a lot of people.
A lot of people.
AnnMarie Boudreau.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. So you were watching coverage last night?
I was indeed.
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, me too. I was watching David Cochrane at home and then wondering how he keeps it all in his head to talk about
And
it.
he sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with, a lot of what Tom said. I think what we have right now is a bit of a budget that, is meeting the moment when you think about the situation that we're in as Canadians and what the provinces from coast to coast to coast are facing right now. I think there was a lot of activity, a lot of announcements made yesterday that are trying to insulate ourselves and deal with some of the realities that are beyond our control and that we've been given that we need to kind of contend with within the country. So,
all right. Lynn Gambin.
Yeah, hi. I agree too. It looks generational. The language has certainly changed in terms of looking at a much longer term time span and about the investment versus operations spending. So it is very much focused on investment to hopefully get us to a longer term return, longer time period return. It will take a long time. It'll be far beyond the time scale of this budget projection, but I think that's a real change. So I think I looked at my notes from the last time I discussed the federal budget, and it was about the status quo. I don't think this is a status quo budget. And the productivity piece is in there as well. We've been struggling with productivity across developed economies, and infrastructure is an essential part of trying to promote productivity.
All right. Scott Matthews.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the budget document in its 400 pages provides a nice definition of what a generational budget is, or maybe in the economics textbooks there's one. So I'm not sure what a generational budget is. But if it suggests something that's kind of a big bang, that's really going to, and this reflects my own kind of interest in public opinion and political communication, that's going to send a really clear message, then I would say it doesn't. It isn't a generational budget by that definition, which might be the wrong one. I mean, I certainly it will have long-term effects, but I guess all budgets have long-term effects. So, my initial response to the content of the budget and also how it's being kind of processed by, opinion leaders, decision makers, is that there's a lot of things going on. There's the investment piece, and it's significant, but maybe not as significant as was expected in some areas. There's not like there's big new tax cuts that we, that are really kind of eye-catching. There are cuts to the public service, but those are all being kind of moderated. There are pretty plausible ways of moderating, the significance of those cuts, and they're going to roll out in some unspecified way over a period of time. Mm-hmm. So just sort of in terms of, will this be a budget that we remember with the 95 budget? I don't think so, at least not based on the last, 18 hours. That's my sense.
Remind people about the 95 budget.
Well, it happened in 1995. And in my memory, and I'm not an economist and certainly not a specialist on budgeting, but in my memory, that was a budget that made some big cuts that really put Canada on a different sort of fiscal path for many years.
Yeah, so this is Chrétien and Paul Martin would have been the finance minister.
Right, exactly. And there were public sector cuts, but not of an enormous scale, actually, in absolute numbers. But it was really about cuts to expenditure, shrinking the deficit, and they did shrink that deficit down to surplus over a number of years over the life of that government. And it was very much in keeping with the times when the idea that you would run a deficit that became highly problematic. It's really the Trudeau government that broke, I think, that narrative in Canadian politics. Even before they came to office, they were talking about a $10 billion deficit at that time. I can remember standing in my kitchen and thinking, wow, that's an interesting moment in Canadian politics. He's anticipating a $10 billion deficit. Of course, it never was as low as $10 billion. It was always more than that.
So even though the Harper government they ran deficits too, but the framing of it with Trudeau was different.
The framing was, this is something positive we're doing. This is, there are important reasons to do this, as opposed to a kind of embarrassment that we try and, quickly, retreat from. So yeah, I don't know if that's a clear answer. Probably not the best sum up of the 95 budget, but at least we remember that. Yeah. It's kind of like it's like a totem for strict budgeting and a real transformation in the fiscal politics of this country. And I just don't think the 2025 budget will rank.
And before I get back to the others, or I toss a general question out, the other bit is, will the votes, right? But it has to be passed. And the news from yesterday, Nova Scotia MP Chris d'Entremont resigns from Conservative caucus to join the Liberals. So the Liberals are two seats shy of a majority with this floor crossing. So that was a bit of, and there's wondering, are there others out there, and is this even needed, and what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, as a political scientist, rather like economists, I like to start from the premise that people will behave rationally, even though it doesn't always. Politicians,
what
anyway.
in today's world makes you think people are going to behave rationally?
It's just a bias from many years of socialization in the political science. At least when we're talking about politicians, yeah. It's a good starting point. Politicians want to be in office. They, their income depends on that. Their livelihood depends on that. So they'll want to win elections. That's a kind of basic premise that an economist actually gave us in political science. And so if they want to stay in office, I think that New Democrats, Conservatives, and the Bloc also won't be super keen to be right back into an election. The only ones who would benefit from that would be the Liberal Party. I should say more than likely it would only be the Liberal Party. I don't see why they would do that. There's no reason to do that. I mean, the NDP in particular, I mean, they don't have any money. They don't even have a leader. Actually, the fact, as I mentioned off air earlier, I think the fact that the Conservatives and the BQ have been quite clear that they cannot be moved, that convinces me that the NDP has in some way sent the message that, we're probably going to just stay home that day washing our hair or something and miss that vote. Or, maybe a couple of them maybe they will be persuaded to vote with the government. Maybe there's room for change in this budget with all of its many different elements. But I would be stunned if there was an election before Christmas. But I have been stunned a lot over the last 10 years, so take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think Andrew Coyne last night mentioned something similar around the NDP, being like, look, to just what you just said for what he thinks is going to happen too. There's some analysis on the CBC business page by Peter Armstrong. It says, federal budget charts difficult path out of current crisis with small margin of error. Whether upside or downside scenario plays out, plan relies on economy keeping its head above water. And like the two scenarios, one involves whether or not we deal with some of the tariff and United States issues, and the other sees us maybe going into a recession. So then for what you folks are looking at, what do you think about just the range of what the scenarios could be for the budget and what you're looking to expect in the coming months, or what you're looking for or paying attention to? Who wants to jump in on that?
I would say, like Scott said, I'm prepared to be stunned because we never know what can come up tomorrow or today with international trade and trading with the U.S. I do think, it's good to see the upside and downside that they've got there. We are on a path of low growth, and in the period here, it's, they're projecting, I think, still less than 2% growth, which is not ambitious. But again, we've been at very low growth, potentially in a recession, just averting it now again. So the projections and how it's all going to pay off, I think, is something to still keep an eye on. And there are a lot of factors outside of the direct control or influence of Canada, even a country of our size. We don't have any influence on what the White House will announce. We don't have influence on other things that are going on too. Political instability in other countries certainly affects us. All to be kept in mind.
Tom, what about yourself?
For me, I think what's going to happen, Adam, is that, and we saw this pre-budget, is that they're going to signal there's a whole bunch of these nation-building projects. Yep. And these nation-building projects, whether it's going to be, hey, we're going to build a dam, or we're going to build a port, or we're going to build all those sort of things, that's going to be over and above the growth, but they're going to borrow against that while reducing their operating budget in terms of core civil service and all those sort of things. That should, AnnMarie, attract a lot of private capital because people are going to be interested in that. That's going to, Scott, go after jobs because, that's a lot of skilled trades, especially in their interest. And from an economic standpoint, Lynn, that's going to kind of maybe push the growth a little bit more. I always think, first of all, Prime Minister Carney is an investment banker. And investment bankers like to make sure that they have something which has upside and downside, with a lot more upside than it is downside. He's not a risk taker, but he is someone who can build a good business case for things. And so I think that's one of the things we see implicit in this budget is a lot of form over fireworks. And those forms in terms of, I think it's going to be the build. And that's going to be something that's attractive from a political standpoint. If you're going up against the Conservatives and Poilievre and saying, hey, we're investing, we're trying to get Canadians back to work, we're trying to give them really good jobs, we're trying to build the next infrastructure to take advantage of what's going on in Asia and mitigate what's going on in the United States, it's a good political story. It's a good message from a business standpoint. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to invest in housing, who want to invest in telecommunications and other types of infrastructure projects, and they're going to be interested in that.
What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would agree with exactly what Tom just said. I think implementation of this will be key because I think there's a lot of really good strategy that was brought forward yesterday. There's a lot of collaboration that's going to be required. Even a lot of the programs that the federal government had introduced yesterday is going to require provincial, kind of matching that dollar for dollar. So execution and the implementation of this and how the provinces and the federal government work together to come up with what rollout looks like. And ultimately, at the end of the day, will the investment that this is intended to attract result? And I think that will come down to how this, is delivered and what the execution of this looks like. Because at the surface level, it looks like a really strategic plan, but it's going to take a lot of people who buy into it and who react as we predict and as we need to deliver and to make that, I think, generational change.
What have you been hearing? So for the Board of Trade, for all the businesses that you work with across the province, like what are the things that folks have been telling you? The one on my end of it, from like talking to folks, it's always like the thing that keeps coming up because of like with the U.S. and everything going on, it's uncertainty and how uncertainty is really, really bad for business. So does this kind of inject some more certainty for folks? If you're a small business in Newfoundland and Labrador, like what Tom was saying there too, you're looking ahead of these plans laid out and the potential for growth and investment, and perhaps there was something also in the budget about the province matching investment money from the feds and that type of a thing, and also lower taxation around if you're building kind of anything, your tax goes to zero. What does that mean, do you think, for Newfoundland and Labrador?
I think it does change the climate a little bit. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. We have been hearing, there's a little bit of paralysis that has, I think, covered the economy throughout the country because of the unpredictability that a lot of what the U.S. and the decisions that President Trump has taken has, put onto our country. So I think that's absolutely true. People have been very risk adverse. And when you're not willing to take a risk, you're not really investing in research, you're not investing in people, you're certainly not investing in infrastructure. So the economy has just kind of stalled. So I think yesterday was certainly an example of the federal government trying to use the levers that they can to ignite that stimulus and ignite the growth and the economic activity that does result in infrastructure and certainly does result in jobs. I think the announcements made around the productivity and investment for business support, particularly there's a procurement program that was announced for small to medium businesses. There's innovation tax credits, infrastructure, the $115 billion that was earmarked, additional investment tax credits for clean growth, and Churchill Falls, was mentioned as part of the budget. So I think all of those things, hopefully, will bring a degree of certainty and infuse some of that activity that has dissipated back into the Newfoundland and Labrador business scape.
Speaking of Churchill Falls, we have a clip there that we're going to line up. Just give me one little second there. You guys want to play the clip? We've got a clip there of the Premier from on Monday. So I went up to Confederation Building, and so also for people who don't know, if you listen to podcasts, this is Newfoundland and Labrador, a brand new news podcast from CBC, Newfoundland and Labrador, one story a week. This week it's an interview with the Premier and also the Leader of the Opposition, whose roles got switched with the most recent election. So if you can do me a favor, listeners, and hit the subscribe button on that. That being said, here's Premier Wakeham on Monday.
The whole idea of the referendum is after the deal is finalized. So the first step, though, is to have that independent review. And that's why it's so critical for me. And, I was sworn in last week. And so now the first piece of business is to get those people to create this independent panel to do the review. And they have to be independent. And that's why I'm taking my time, because I don't want to rush and just simply say, okay, you're going to be on the review, or, as was done before. That doesn't work. This has to be something that we lay down a good terms of reference. But yes, I'm committed to getting this started very quickly. I want to see this done. I'm hoping to have it done within the panel announced within the next 2 weeks. That's the key for me. And then allow them to do the work that they need to do. I mean, they'll want to review everything that's been done before, but we'll open it up. But they will be allowed to do their job. And they'll come back and make recommendations to us. And based on what they recommend, then that will be the next step. But that's the timeline that we've set, and we're open to do deals with Quebec, absolutely. But again, we're going to make sure that we continue to follow what I believe was laid out by Judge LeBlanc in the inquiry, and I believe in that, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
The Prime Minister says we're in a time of Canada building projects. I'm just wondering if you've spoken with the Prime Minister yet, and just your thoughts on where Newfoundland and Labrador fits with everything that is going on federally.
Well, I spoke with the Prime Minister. He called me when I won the election, and we had a brief conversation. We did talk about nation-building projects. I did talk about our offshore oil. I did talk about our opportunity under national defense spending. But one of the other things now, that the budget is coming out on Tuesday, tomorrow, from the feds we'll be looking for is issues around healthcare transfers. The last time they negotiated healthcare transfers, they got a small increase in the actual transfers, and they got one-time funding. One-time funding runs out, so it's more important for me to look at healthcare transfers and what it actually means to us because, for the first time in our history, I think we're the only province in Canada now that has 25% of its population considered to be a senior.
Yeah.
So, we need to look at that, and I'm going to see what's in there for the so-called nation-building projects.
So that was Premier Wakeham on Monday. In my inbox this morning, a statement from Premier Wakeham, subject Federal Budget 2025. Yesterday's federal budget unfortunately raises far more questions than answers when it comes to whether or not it will benefit Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Our government remains concerned about the lack of any Newfoundland and Labrador projects being named in the federal government's list of nation-building projects. A brief mention of Churchill Falls and Gull Island is not the same as a commitment to invest in our province. It also appears that the Atlantic Fisheries Fund and jobs at DFO are potentially on the chopping block. If Ottawa is going to continue to reject or request to jointly manage the fishery, then they need to be able to make the case that they are doing their job. Cutting DFO does not send a positive message to our fishing industry. With that said, there are broad commitments that we hope will open the door for opportunities here in the province. There was language that seemed to indicate an openness to removing the emissions cap, which would be good news for our oil and gas sector. There were also large dollar amounts committed to infrastructure and defense spending. I trust that the federal government will want to make sure that Newfoundland and Labrador get our fair share of this national spending. Later this month, I plan to travel to Ottawa to meet with relevant ministers on issues important to our province. I hope to gain clarity during that trip about exactly how Ottawa plans to invest in Newfoundland and Labrador. So that's from Premier Wakeham, a statement this morning. You have plans. And then in this political world we live in, you've got the reality of how it gets kind of taken from folks, right? Like, so we've had, your thoughts so far. We're hearing other thoughts from other places. This is the premier. What do you kind of make on what he's saying for the layout of what the federal government is pitching in this? And there's, more details to be brought compared to what Premier Wakeham's saying. Who wants to weigh in?
Well, this is maybe a minor point, but I think the premier, like me, is a little confused about the message. Thinks that it's not. There's a lot more detail we want. There's a lot more things we need to know about before we can really decide what to make of the budget. I don't know. It's maybe it's not a generational budget for Newfoundland and Labrador yet, or at least not in his estimation.
I think there's potential. Go ahead. There's areas in it like development of ports and hydroelectricity. The north as well is an important feature for Newfoundland and Labrador to see where we can get the best benefits for the province from as well. So there's potential there, just not stated explicitly.
AnnMarie?
Yeah, I was just going to say I appreciate his concern. Absolutely. There's been a lot of conversation around, where's the Newfoundland and Labrador projects in terms of, major projects that are going to be developed. We keep hearing the Bay du Nord conversation. We keep hearing the Churchill Falls, Gull Island conversation. So I absolutely appreciate that that's really high on his radar. And he's saying, well, where are our projects? Because I think that's exactly what we should be saying. And that's the conversation that we need to be having at a national level. We want a leader who goes to Ottawa and says, well, what about Newfoundland and Labrador? Because we deserve our place and we have earned our place and we have a lot to offer to the major projects in this one Canadian economy that the federal government is really focused on. So happy to hear his concern, happy to share his concern.
Tom?
If I go to Ottawa as the premier, I want to come up with credible de-risk projects that are going to be a win-win for both. Sorry, that's a business school phrase, but but it's going to be something that's going to benefit both Canada as well as Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah.
And that involves plans, and that involves thinking, and that involves whether it's ports or hydroelectricity or Bay du Nord, et cetera. But you got to de-risk it. So think about that. Carney is once again, I always think of the people that I'm dealing with. Carney doesn't want to have a huge amount of risk. Most of those projects that he announced have already started.
Yeah, they were not even shovel ready. Shovels in the ground.
Shovels in the ground,
dug
et
out
cetera.
and built, right?
Right. And to me, that's what we need to focus maybe on as a province. And, and when I hear Premier Wakeham, sorry, I'm getting used to saying that. When I hear Premier Wakeham speaking, he's speaking about stuff that, Scott, that politically is super important. Healthcare, transfers, all those sort of things. And sometimes we forget that for the future generations, these big projects are really what defines the economy and makes this a great place to stay, not only to live, because there is those jobs and there is that infrastructure and there is those economic multipliers that help.
So looking ahead, one of the big things, it's the renegotiation of CUSMA, previously the North American Free Trade Agreement. And it depends on the day what comes out from Washington on the opinion of one person in the White House, or if you look at the ambassador to Canada, who's been saying some choice things lately. What do you think the chances of that high end with the budget of being like, hey, if we actually work some stuff out, we get a good negotiation, tariffs, there's a high end of success that we could hopefully plan for. What's the outlook with the Americans on all of this? And is it waiting till the midterms? Is it there's been some, I'm just looking at the New York mayoral election, plus there's some Democrats won yesterday for governor seats. So there's changes afoot south of a border. Does it mean anything for us when it comes to negotiations? I'll go to the political scientist.
I mean, I think President Trump isn't that concerned about what happens in Congress or the other branches of government generally. So
at all, yeah.
I think trade will still be at the sort of whim of the president. I think that, having said that, I think that we're kind of in a stable situation now. I mean, even with his most recent, I'm just going to call it a temper tantrum about the Ford ad or the Ford government's ad, which obviously it took him weeks for it to attract notice, because I heard about it long before that and thought, oh, wow, this is pretty kind of bullshit of the Ontario government, but okay. But in any case, Trump said 10% tariffs off, on Canada. Nobody knows what that means. Apparently nothing so far, because nothing's changed. The Treasury Secretary was over the weekend said, well, we'll see. Donald Trump's favorite phrase, we'll see. We'll see what happens. As though he's not in control of what happens. But in any case, so I think at the moment, what we can probably hope for is just to continue very much as we are with this kind of on again, off again discussion about our trading relationship. We're relative to the rest of the world, not in a terrible position in terms of the kind of effective tariff on Canadian goods. Maybe it's the best in the world, given all the carve-outs under CUSMA. And if we open discussions next year, we can perhaps just hope to prolong those discussions.
Rag the puck, as they say. Just rag that puck until maybe something changes?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the best with sporting metaphor, but I recognize that's a hockey-related.
At least you got the sport there. I recognize that's a tennis-related term. No, Professor.
But yeah, so I think that I think it seems plausible to say that the Trump administration, not just Trump, but the broader administration, recognizes that there's a real downside to disrupting the relationship with Canada much more profoundly than they've already done. And while Trump will never back down and say he's wrong, or if he does, he'll tell you, not that he was wrong, but just tell you that the past is different than you remember it. But in any case, that's not going to happen. But just kind of, muddling through as we've been doing, I think that's a pretty good outcome. And maybe that's a kind of stable outcome for the life of this administration.
He really must have dented your rational actor thinking over the last few years, hey?
Not just mine. There's a lot of political scientists who've had to reconsider their views of the world since 2016.
I was just curious about the earlier comment. Lynn, what about yourself? When we look at CUSMA, when we look at the trading relationship, because I think, what is it, CUSMA covers 85% of trade with the United States and what it can mean for the economy. I'm just thinking if we go into that other far end of we don't work things out and we go into a recession and what it could mean.
Yeah, well, I think the investment approach that they're trying to take is about shoring up our other things, our other options. So, I mean, for Newfoundland and Labrador, just to bring it back to that for a second, I think that presents us with the opportunity to really be able to build something here, given our proximity to Europe and our shipping lines and things like that we have potential there. The uncertainty is always there. I think what Scott said, muddling through until we get to the next administration is hopefully going to see a change come along there. I mean, we've got a long history and a large important part of our economy hinges on the United States, and our people are integrated in lots of different ways as well. So it is an important thing to not want to sever it unless it gets pushed that way.
Yeah. All right.
But diversification is really important. New products, new exports, new trading partners, new supply chains throughout other areas as well.
Tom, the PM was in Asia last week, right? So speaking of diversifying, he was looking at South Korean submarines. There are talks with the Chinese about renewing that relationship. Talks also with the Indian government, too, for trying to renew things after the last few years. Like, what are your thoughts on just those efforts for diversifying or looking at Europe as well?
And it's Asia is a great market, especially for our seafood.
Yeah.
Love our seafood. And as we can say as professors, getting great students from Southeast Asia, et cetera, to come over and be international students and help from there as well. Europe has always been the traditional market, and like Memorial has a campus in the UK, in Harlow. And
for now, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on that.
No, I won't do that to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. But the notion of new markets not relying solely on the United States is important. One thing, though, that we haven't really talked about the relationship between the United States and Canada from a financial standpoint is going to be we need to borrow, though, a lot of money to do these projects and to do these. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the bond markets and a lot of ability for sovereign nations to start to go to the markets because people are concerned globally, financially, about what's going on in the United States. And that ability to borrow all that money at reasonable rates that you're not paying huge amounts for 10, 15 years, et cetera, is always going to be an issue. So diversification is good. More diversification, looking at different markets, having those conversations is a good de-risking measure. But we also have to think of the broader risk in terms of, for example, hey, we go into the Middle East and we have conversations there. They can lend us a lot of this type of money to do those projects, but what's that going to be for the relationship with the United States? Do they need the money as well? So there's a lot of confusion, especially in the financial markets, about what's going on.
Is there anything else other than seafood for the Asian market for us for diversifying? Because I remember I went to China on a fellowship in 2015, and the whole thing of that trip was about Canadian seafood, Atlantic Canadian seafood, being sold on the Chinese market. And this was a time when they had you could buy through Alibaba, the e-commerce site. You could buy Canadian lobster, Atlantic Canadian lobster. So like what we did, I go to this market in Shanghai. They got a tank. There's Canadian lobster in the tank. They someone puts an order in. They put it in a box, and we put a camera on a guy, and he just drove through Shanghai on like a moped and delivered it for, back then, I think it was like a 2-pound lobster for like the equivalent of $40. And the purchasing of that was going gangbusters back then. And we've had issues, the two Michaels, human rights stuff, the relationship's been damaged. But outside of seafood, what else is there for diversifying?
There's mining, and that's probably the biggest one. Seafood is sexy. Mining is maybe a bit boring, but when we look at critical minerals, when we look at the traditional relationships that we've had with Asia with our iron ore that comes out of Labrador, mining is a big, big one. And moreover, we're seeing huge amounts of mining activity across the province. Part of that's driven as well in terms of it's going up and going down depending on markets, et cetera. But critical minerals is a big negotiating element between China and the United States. That's one of the big things that just happened last week, I believe. There was an agreement around critical minerals. So I would say that that's another area of diversification. Forestry products, I don't know as much, Adam, but that intuitively. I know that Kruger was selling into the Indian market for quite a long time. I think it's also just, our tech and those other areas that we sometimes take for granted.
Well, and with thinking of China, the headlines recently, it's just been how well they've been doing with their transition around climate. So like from their solar panels and everything else. I mean, this is where those rare earth or the minerals can come into that discussion as well, right? And China's really going full bore on that when it comes to investment.
100%. And there's lots of really interesting things going on in China, but at the same time, there's lots of questions around China.
Well, that's it. Like the human rights questions as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. AnnMarie, anything on your end of what you're hearing from whether it's the mining stuff or the business side of it for diversifying?
Well, I think we have the rationale that we shouldn't go back and get comfortable again. So I think, we've had kind of the rug pull out from underneath us, and I don't think people will forget that. I do think when and if things settle down, then yes, it will be really easy to regain some of the trusted partnerships and relationships that we've always relied on and have served us very well. But I think we'll always know now that there's a vulnerability. So I think that will drive us. And whether that's development, domestically, so that we're buying and building what we need within Canada, or diversifying with partnerships and trade. So I do think that we've all learned a lesson that will keep in the back of our mind and will inform decisions moving forward.
So then what should we watch for to see whether or not, how things are moving ahead with all the, whether it's risks or uncertainty or wondering how folks react to things? Like, what are the things you're looking for to see, like, hey, we're actually making progress? Like, homes being built, deals being made, CUSMA renegotiated? But, like, what are the things you're looking for to see, like, this plan is now doing what it should be doing?
Well, can I just before saying something about that,
just
go back to the in terms of things that come out of Newfoundland and Labrador that we export. One of those things is education. I mean, it's not a merchandise, but it's really significant. And this budget seems to be continuing on the path of making it harder for students to come to Canada by because they've included in here continuing the planned reduction to temporary residents in Canada.
I think it was halved.
Yeah. Right. And so that is continuing us on a bad path. I mean, we definitely have a comparative advantage in Canada and in a number of other countries. We have a comparative advantage in education, and this budget is not reflecting that. And so I just wanted to say that, obviously a very self-interested sort of point, but I believe it too. In terms of things to look for as this all rolls out, I guess I'll be looking to see if there's a lot of real teeth to this major projects office, and to see if it really does get through some of the hurdles that it suggested it might push through. I mean, a lot of what keeps major projects from happening quickly is what we call democracy. Lots of people being involved, having a say in many different communities at many different levels in how these kinds of projects proceed.
Yeah, not making mistakes of the past, of not consulting with Indigenous communities and having them as partners, having rural communities actually understand what is happening and wanting to be part of it and to buy into it, as opposed to just building something somewhere. You're like, no, that's there now. It's for the benefit of the country.
Right, and no matter how much goodwill there is to make those kinds of, get that kind of buy-in, make that kind of consultation happen, it still does actually take time. I mean, people only can move so fast. These kinds of processes can only move so fast in terms of engaging and consulting people. And of course, with regard to the rights of Indigenous people, there is great uncertainty about the implications of Indigenous rights for many of these projects. Yeah. Don't ask me to name a specific one, but I know, for instance, there's a potentially massively consequential decision in the Supreme Court of British Columbia that has thrown certain land rights, property ownership rights in my hometown of Richmond, British Columbia, into question. Yeah. The implications of that are yet to be worked out. I'm not saying that these people aren't going to have they're going to lose their property. I don't know, but it has created uncertainty that we'll be waiting for the Supreme Court to work out, and that's just one scene of a big drama in the continuing to kind of work out new, different, better relationships with Indigenous people that have real legal and economic implications.
Yeah, I guess that's why for the major projects office to be in Canada's national interest, it's whether a project will strengthen Canada's autonomy, resilience, and security, whether a project will provide economic or other benefits to Canada, the likelihood of successful project execution, whether a project will advance the interest of Indigenous people, whether a project will contribute to clean growth and address climate change, and then it from the budget proposes $213 million over 5 years, starting in 2025-2026, for that office, right? And then things go beyond that with the investment and everything else. Anyone else with thoughts just on what we're looking for success?
We'll be looking at unemployment and employment figures, how they go over the coming periods, and where GDP is going as well.
Yeah, like youth unemployment, is it like 14% nationally right now or something? Anyway, but one of the big issues right now is youth unemployment.
Yeah, and I think also there is going to be an issue with all of these infrastructure, all of these major projects about the capability of our workforce and the mobility of the workforce and the readiness to hit the ground and make these things come to fruition. So it's hard to build dams and oil rigs and ports without a skilled workforce. And there are risks if we rely on bringing in skilled workers from elsewhere for the province, but trying to rely on just moving pools of people around the country, that you end up driving up the wages on big projects for a limited amount of time and then leaving a higher housing cost and empty towns. So for Newfoundland and Labrador, that's something to keep in mind as well. And we won't see that immediately, but it is something that I think we should learn from the past on doing that as we move forward.
Especially when we've been in a bit of a there's this downswing happening for skilled labor in the province. You have people getting trained, looking for apprenticeships, not able to find them, and there's stuff on the horizon. But it's like, will they stay here for when that work comes, or will they be somewhere else? So like all of these things are out there floating around that need to kind of align.
Yeah, and alongside of that, thinking about the youth unemployment issue, thinking about Indigenous communities, the importance of prioritising development of skills within those groups as well, I think should be kept top of mind when we look at what projects we can bring on to Newfoundland and Labrador and across other areas of the country.
Yeah. AnnMarie, what are you looking for?
I think, on a really granular level, some of it's just access and action. Like, there's a lot of programs that were announced yesterday, and a lot of which would support and aid local businesses here in Newfoundland and Labrador. When will those websites go live? When will those phone numbers be out? When will businesses on the ground here be able to access some of these things? And I guess that's the difference and the gap that's like between the theory and the announcement that's made on budget day, and when does it come to fruition? When can someone put in an application?
Right. I mean, it's big, right? Like, okay, we've got a plan,
matters.
But when are we actually walking and chewing the gum at the same time
That's
for this
right.
thing?
Yeah.
Right? Tom Cooper.
Maybe even a more granular level than that. Which
Do it.
Go right in. Zoom in.
Building housing, that's one of the ones. If you're going to have skilled workers, they need to have a place to stay. The people are going to, if you can build more houses, then you're going to have some more trained workers. Mm-hmm. You're also going to be able to, once again, address a big gap in our economy, which is affecting a lot of people. And so I would see that as, even if we had that's the first infrastructure project, to build more houses, to build more relevant houses for people as well, not just big, nice, huge mega mansions, but also whether skilled workers can afford and pay the mortgage, et cetera. I think that'll open up a lot of different things. So when I see that starting to occur, and when I see governments, both at the federal, municipal, and provincial levels all working together on that, to me, that'll be an indicator that, yes, this is something that's going to occur, because I think that's one of the first things they got to address. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe, there's obviously bonds and all that's fun stuff. But for the average person who's walking the streets in St. John's, if you start seeing housing being built, especially multi-unit housing, then you're going to say, okay, well, maybe these projects will come to fruition.
Scott, to go back to you mentioned like on the immigration side of it, and we talked specifically with the university. But I'm just thinking the province. So there's that side of it for the province and education. But if we have substantial cuts to immigration, and there's the bigger Canadian discussion, or what might be a Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal discussion, but then there's the discussion for Newfoundland and Labrador that last I checked was on the downtick again with population. So we were growing over quarters, and now we're on the downtick again. What do we think this outlook means for Newfoundland and Labrador as we're trying to build houses, trying to maybe have some bigger projects, and also just strengthen our communities and and hopefully increase that population for a bigger bit of a tax base in a province, by the way, that has not had a good record of keeping people here, right? They come in and then it's like actually greener pastures elsewhere in the country.
No, you can go.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, I wasn't
Everyone's
sure I had
eyeballing
something
and
to say.
gesturing.
Yeah.
I could actually ask specific questions to one person, but I like waiting with the silence of radio because it's uncomfortable.
I guess I am stuck on education, and I probably don't have much to say about kind of population growth and immigration generally. It's just not my area of expertise. But I would, one of the ways that we grow this province is by bringing people here to St. John's anyway, and involving them in our educational opportunities. And so, and I just this past weekend happened to meet with one of my students who just graduated, and I think he's now set to be who came from elsewhere, and I think he's now set to be a long-term, really significant contributor to the life of this province. He's doing well. And I think that this story is multiplied 1,000-fold in the minds of faculty at Memorial. And so the massive disruption we've had to that pipeline for growth in this province over the past couple of years with the change to the immigration thresholds or limits, I think that is one of the most significant challenges for us, and I don't see anything in the budget here that's helping that.
Oh, and to also clarify my point a couple minutes ago too about the greener pastures, I've met tons of, over the last few years, loads of people who wanted to stay here, graduated from the university, higher level master's level, right? Sometimes PhD, wanting to stay, but the jobs were not here for them, and so they left. Right now, that's just me through my orbit of being on the show and talking to people and meeting them. But that's always this interesting point of I met another family a few years ago who I think they both had their masters and went up along for a bit, didn't like it, moved back, opened a restaurant because they like the quality of life here. There is something here that people do enjoy and like, but if you can't get a job, you got to look around, right?
Yeah, there is an association between getting your higher education here and being more likely to stay here compared to other people that have moved to the province. I would like to say too about, there's a couple of things on immigration. Yes, the cut in the numbers. There's also initiatives about, I don't have the details on them, but it's noted in the budget about attracting high-skilled immigrants and bringing in people into the universities, I guess at the professor level or the researcher level. So there's kind of a mix between immigration policy that is not, it's just, there's a lot of confounding factors there and what the ideal is. Immigration for temporary foreign workers, if it's misused, is a really bad thing. And if the volumes of immigrants for temporary positions tending to be on the lower skilled end of the labor market, there's also then the extra pressures that puts on local housing, local services, healthcare, and so on. So I think immigration policy without it having a really good target and a really set target is difficult. And you get these unintended consequences of our high-skilled people leave or we don't keep attracting them in the future.
Right. AnnMarie?
I was just going to say, so, I know the plan will be released in the next few days and we'll see kind of what the reality of what they're going to execute is. But the Board of Trade has been very active and been advocating a lot over the last little while that we need a tailored approach and that you do need to take in the realities of the demographic and the situation of provinces and not really make these sweeping policy decisions and apply them uniformly from coast to coast to coast because the demographics and the realities in each province are very different. So we will continue to be a voice on that and continue to advocate because if we should be so lucky that we move forward on these projects, if this theory that we saw in the announcements that we saw yesterday released in the budget work in this province and they do bring attract investment and we do see projects happening and we see economic stimulus and we move forward with, any number of, even half of the projects that are being talked about right now, we are going to need more people to help make that happen.
And even thinking to the temporary foreign worker side of it, the youth unemployment rate looking at St. John's is different than Clarenville, is different than Happy Valley, Goose Bay, is also different in the Yukon. Things are not the same everywhere when it comes to labor availability. Like to Lynn's point, it can be really complicated in trying to get it right. And then the swing of the pendulum also politically for the mood and the realities of the country and communities. Any other thoughts, Tom, on Any of those points?
It's, as a professor, it's one of the things that keeps me awake at night, Adam. Like, I have these amazing students who want to stay here and they can't get those first jobs. They can get a job, but, and some of them stay here like incredibly underemployed because they like being here in Newfoundland. Hopefully these projects maybe once again can really attract and give positions for those people who just need that first job to get on that ladder and to give that experience, etc. And for anybody listeners, if you're looking for some really good recent MBA grads, just send me an email, tcooper@mon.ca. I got some amazing students who are looking for jobs. But I think this is one of, as Scott said, this is, it's a wasted opportunity. We have a university which has capacity, which has amazing professors, and a place in Newfoundland where we all kind of know each other and we can give, those kind of saying, hey, Tom is really good at this, but Tom is not good at this. You should consider Tom for this type of job, which lowers the risk for employers. And I think that's really valuable in comparison to some of bigger jurisdictions and bigger places where, the professors at least can't tell, because you got 400 students in your class, you can't really give that personal recommendation. And I give a lot of those personal recommendations. And for me, the students and the new Canadians, and whether you're a super skilled tradesperson from Poland or you're from Tanzania, it doesn't really matter as long as they have those opportunities, because I think life in Newfoundland and Labrador starts to speak for itself after a while.
And we're still in a place where, you can pick up the phone. People, they're not that removed, right? We're not in such a big pool that you can't get in touch with people. For example, you're on the radio now with the head of the Board of Trade, right? There might be a conversation later for an MBA student or whatever. Things are not that far removed in this province. With 3 minutes left, any final thoughts from you all on just the outlook, or whether it could be something positive, pessimistic, the outlook, what you're looking for, what you're worried about, what you're really positive about, Professor Matthews?
So I'm curious to see, and we'll be watching over the next few days, if there emerges a discourse about the size of the deficit. I'm sort of just as a political analyst, I'm curious. Yeah. I think if it had been closer to $100 billion, round figures for no good reason at all really attract our attention. I think that would have been a dangerous place for government to go. But $78 billion is quite a lot, I'm not. This isn't an economic opinion that I'm not qualified to give, but that's a big number too. And so will we see over the next few days more conservative voices? I'm not saying extremely conservative or partisan voices, but more conservative voices start to raise some questions about that, and raise some questions about some of the new, anchors, so to speak, that they how they refer to different ways of measuring how the government is performing fiscally. Will there be more of a discourse about this? Because I think if that starts to happen, if that starts to be seen as something of a problem, that's when the public might react. I think there is some tolerance for deficits, for sure, but there are limits, even among the public, and those limits will be broached if there's a kind of discourse that emerges about the size of the deficit.
And not the first time a budget could have brought down a government, thinking to the Crosby budget under Joe Clark. Lynn Gambin.
Yeah, I'll follow on from that about the size of the deficits of the debt, and the debt to GDP ratio is what they're kind of banking on it, that there's fiscal room there for us to make these investment decisions and these investments. The thing to keep in mind, I think, from just an outside perspective of what is in the budget, is this is a very long-term. Investments is a long-term thing. We are foregoing something today to hopefully get more in the future, and that's to be kept in mind. So if it's not satisfying everything else, there's kind of the hope that it's going to be directed investment that gets returns for the country as a whole, but also within Newfoundland, Labrador and other places. And I think, as Tom said before, it's important that we see what opportunities are there for this province and how we can make them happen.
30 seconds.
I think that, constituents and Canadians, we get to hold government accountable. And I think there are lots of conversations, memorial, industry, and associations like ours throughout the province. You can reach out to government and ask questions. And we have, I think, a responsibility to hold government account. And if there's a program you're waiting for, if there's something you need information on so that you can move and do your part, I would encourage people to reach out and ask.
Ask, push. Tom Cooper.
Let's get her done.
There you go. I love it. That was right on time. That was perfect. Thank you. I love when guests are watching the clock with me here. That is it for today's show. If you've got thoughts for us, the Signal at cbc.ca. You can call the Signal line and leave a message, 709-576-5260. Tomorrow on the show, we will we're going to talk about Hurricane Melissa, a local fundraiser to help Jamaica's recovery. We'll talk to folks in the local diaspora, and we will talk about the impacts of climate change on developing nations and what the world owes to help with adaptation, mitigation, and resiliency. Cheers.